Hey there, welcome to First Look. I'm in the sanctuary today because I wasn't here last week, and so I feel like I missed it. So I thought, well, I'm in my work clothes and I've got work shoes on, and work shoes are not really great for walking around lakes or in forests or anything like that. So I thought I'll combine the best of two worlds. I missed the sanctuary this past week, and so why not just do this walking around the sanctuary, which I love anyway. So I have not got a chance to view or participate in the worship service that Ken Yost led this past week. I don't have any doubt that it was fantastic because Ken always does a wonderful job. And I know that you all were able to see the series that we have been doing from another perspective, which is perfect. But I've gotten only good reports and only good things have I heard about it, so I'm looking forward to doing that. But this week we are moving forward in the sermon series. We have this one and a couple more weeks, and then on the 30th is when we have that pulpit swap that you may have heard me talk about. And so Reverend Tyler Domsky is going to be here. And he's gonna keep it going. He's gonna actually round it out. He'll be the last one, which I'm also excited about because that means that sort of sprinkled in there is not just my voice, but a few other ones. So that's fantastic. So I explained to him what the series was about, and so he's on board, and we'll round that out in his own way, whatever that looks like for him. But for this week, we're moving back into the prophets, and this time we're in Isaiah. We've been in Jeremiah a little bit, and this is Isaiah. And for a good reason, I think we can Isaiah and Jeremiah have a lot of the same kind of modes of operation. We can kind of see them in a similar light. They're both talking about exile. They're both talking about what God will do and how God will reconcile things. Isaiah, I think we classically think about more in terms of Messiah for all the passages that look at that. Jeremiah, I think we talk more about reconciliation, God's love in general, God healing all things, a new covenant. Like those are the types of things that we think about when it comes to Jeremiah. But Isaiah, I think we talk a lot about Messiah. So this isn't about that specifically, but it is something that I think that we at least keep in mind while we're doing this. So this passage for this week comes near the end. It's Isaiah 55, and so it's not Isaiah. You can kind of think of it as something that's kind of split up into three different books. One kind of looking at exile, one in the midst of exile, the other kind of in retrospect, I guess you could say. And that's where we are here, is in that last section, that last book. And this section, I think, is, if I'm remembering right, a few churches ago, the first church I was serving in the Pittsburgh area, so the second one, we were doing a lot of reimagining of the congregation and new programs and new ways of thinking about our presence in the community. We started a community garden. We started some new mission stuff. And we used this section. I don't think it was these verses, but we used this section from Isaiah as kind of an anchoring passage because it talks a lot about basically growing where you're planted. It's that kind of concept. And I liked the fact that we were using this this passage because I like the metaphor that's used here, because it's kind of it's a different type of metaphor that I think that we have been kind of talking about the last few weeks. It's almost more of a parable. It has that kind of feeling to it, and it's matched with in the lectionary. It's matched with the sermon about the sower, or the parable of the sower. And tomorrow, which is Wednesday, I'm going to be preaching about that passage, the sower passage, because I just thought it would go well with what we'd be talking about on Sunday, and just kind of trying to tie it all in. So it's about growing, it's about growth, it's about what our capacities are, and so as you're looking at this passage here from Isaiah, you can kind of have in the back of your mind the sower passage, which again we'll be doing tomorrow in the summer worship series midweek thing that we're going to give a try, which is tomorrow at 7. But this is the passage for today, or for Sunday, I should say. And actually what I'm going to do is the verses that we'll read in worship will be verses 10 through 13, but I'm going to read the first, 10 verses or so, and then the passage that we have for the week. Just because when I glanced at it, I saw something in it that I thought was interesting, and I wanted to add it to our conversation. So let me get to that real quick. So this is Isaiah 55, and we're going to start in verse 1. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you that have no money, come and buy and eat. That's the little phrase that I like that we'll get to in a second. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me. Listen so that you may live. I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. I made him a witness to the peoples, a leader and commander for the peoples. See, you shall call nations that you do not know, and nations that do not know you shall run to you because of the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their way, and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them return to the Lord, that he may have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return there until they have watered the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the things for which I sent it. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all of the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. And it shall be to the Lord for a memorial, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. my first thought about that was the agency of it. You know, it's interesting that right in the beginning of that, the reason I wanted to read those first few verses was it was talking about the people who didn't have money and that they should come in and have food. But it doesn't say, come and I will give you something. Like, just show up and you'll be handed this thing. No, it doesn't say that we have to pay for it. The people in the story, it says, come and buy these things that you need, the food and things. It won't cost you anything, but you still buy it. Meaning there's some exchange of something. There's some agency there. They're still bringing themselves. And there was something about that I really connected with. And I think kind of made me think a little bit differently about the rest of the passage. Because it could have just said, and God will give you what you need. And that's a good thing. I mean, there's plenty of passages where it talks about God giving us what we need, but the only way that was going to happen, the way that the people were going to receive what they needed, was that people were going to have to be involved. And in this example, I think in this passage, what I was thinking about was that we're near the end of Isaiah. And Isaiah, like the other prophets, is talking a lot about the exile. And as he's talking about the exile, some of it is about redemption. And that's something for God to accomplish. Something for God to do for the people. But it also is something that the people would have to ultimately do for themselves. That they would have to think about how we got here, what happened, how things were different. And they themselves would have to change. Not just that God would receive them or forgive them or things could go back to the way that they were, but that the people had to have some sort of agency in making things better. And not just physically rebuilding Jerusalem or finding the old ways or reestablishing their religion or whatever. But they'd have to treat themselves, they'd have to treat the land, they'd have to treat each other with a different kind of care. And that even though God would ultimately be the one who made sure that they had all these things, just the fact that it's phrased in this passage, come and buy, and not come and just receive, that there's some kind of exchange happening. That even though the cost would be absorbed by God, that we were still involved, that we were still making a way, that we were still, like I said, having some agency in. And then that got me thinking about the rest of the passage, which I think is fascinating. And I think one of the things I find fascinating about it is kind of the science of it, you know? There's some little element in there that that the people would have to understand how, like, water works, I guess you could call it. Like, before it returns to me, it doesn't return the same. Like, the rain falls and the water is used, but then, you know, it goes back up and comes. There's a cycle to that, you know, the kind of cycle that we learned about in, you know, third grade science class or whatever. There's something about that I found really interesting. That, you know, that water cycle, it doesn't it's changed. It stays the same, but it's also changed. There's some element to that like it has to go through a process. There's a process that goes through. And that's kind of what the passage was talking about a little bit, was the process that we go through of something that feels transformative, something that feels like we are changed and we grow, that it's not just something that happens to us, but something that we actively participate in, which I think is interesting. And so that got me thinking about, a little bit about the sower passage, which again, I'll preach on tomorrow. And then how do those two kind of connect? And I think it's easy to, I think the easier path sometimes is for us to kind of take for granted a little bit that God does so much for us. There's this healing and there's acceptance and there's grace and there's love and that usually when we are trying to change or when we're trying to grow and do something new, that we usually think about our capacity to do that together. When we think about this church, for instance, like we might have meetings or gatherings or discussions or worship services, and we think about, how do we collectively put our minds together to kind of make this church better, or better maybe being the wrong word, making it so that we are being the most faithful and that we are doing all that we can at our capacity to love people and to do that. And I think what I too often probably don't think about for myself or maybe even talk about to you is, that really comes down to a lot of individual decisions. And most of them don't really have to do with a committee or a plan or an outline or something that we've all agreed on or voted on. But most of the time, the thing that really not only brings people here to be with us, but also makes them feel inclined to stay, I think, doesn't really have anything to do with anything that a committee puts in place. I think that helps. That kind of sets the stage. We can, it's a little bit like putting Vacation Bible School together or a mission trip together. Right before I left, we had this mission week at the Hub and North Hills Cares, and we had a great week, and it was good. And all I really did was just make sure that everyone could go where they needed to be. That I was coordinating and making sure that things were ready and available, and that there was work to do, and setting the stage for that, like making sure that those things happen and checking off boxes. And that's great. I'm glad that I'm able to just provide that. But ultimately, your experience didn't have anything to do with any of that coordination. It had to do with you showing up and you putting forth the effort and you deciding that was an important thing to be using your time to do, that helping other people, that packing lunches or sorting fruit or whatever was an important thing for you to do. And obviously it was an important thing for you to do, because otherwise people wouldn't have had what they needed. And there's something individual about that. There's something that, like, each of us make Northmont what it is, and make the church bigger than Northmont, the church, capital C, what it is. And I think that we tend to look out and look at organizations, or we look at groups or committees or entities, and we kind of say, well, they're making the church, good or not good, or if we're going to survive, it's because of these people or those people. When really it comes down to a lot of small individual decisions. Who are we willing to listen to? Whose effort will we follow? But what effort are we putting into that? It's an individual kind of thing. And I liked, the other thing I liked about this passage was the seasonality to it. It was talking about the snow and the rain and the water returning to God and not being the same. And that's a cyclical thing. And cycles come in seasons, and they leave, but then they come back around. And I am not always going to know what to do, how to act, how to be, what will really affect any kind of change. But I think one of the things you rely on is these, that with each season comes a different type of opportunity, and that those things come back around if we're lucky. If I'm lucky, I have another Advent here with you. If I'm lucky, I have another Lent here with you, or another Easter, another Christmas, and a lot of other weeks in between. And so there's something about the kind of the tethering of that, anticipation of that, that I think I find more and more important. I think the longer you're in a place, I think what you recognize is looking forward to each season as its own thing, its own chance to do something again or anew. And that's what's so fascinating about it. And that's what I kind of saw in this passage too, is the honoring of that, the rhythm. This place is really meaningful to me. And I do miss it when I'm not here. And as I miss you when I'm not here. And I know it's just a week, whatever, but I think I try to keep as much perspective on what is precious, And I think one of the things that you read in Scripture over and over again is how the people didn't take what they had, or they tried to remember not to take what they had for granted. That they had festivals around harvest, and things like that remind you that, like, hey, this might happen every year, but if it doesn't happen every year, then things can get bad really quickly. And they knew what famine looked like, and they knew what drought looked like, and they knew what it was not to have something. That's why things like Jesus' living water were so important, and these metaphors around growing were so important, because they were literally important for life, but then they also, of course, added to their own story. And what I liked about this was, what was different about this particular passage was, at least for the last several weeks, I think that the parables, or the language that the author has used, were more about emotion, anger or despair, or some other feeling that we try to grapple with, and that's what the artist does, processing that thing out loud so that we can process it. internally in private. But this one, it was like kind of this common experience, this shared experience. And it felt very Jesus-like in that way. I like that, when it's something that feels practical, we can see it, we can understand it, we know what the rain does, and we know how water works, and we get that part. And it's bringing language to something that is so common and yet is so profound. And I love that intersection between how what is so common is also very profound. And I think one of the things that I have started to try to appreciate more and more are the simple things that are profound. This is the only time that Liam will be 7. That kind of feeling. He still wants to go to the movies with his parents. It's that kind of stuff. And every year, we can do things like go to Ohio Pile or go to special places like Montreat, or he can go to camp, or we can go to the movies. But there'll only be one time when he's 7 when we do that. So anyway, that's just something I was thinking about, how things can be special and cyclical at the same time. Well, that's what I have for this week. Thank you very, very much for all the ways that you think through this with me, that you do this with me, that you contemplate what all this can mean. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. So take care for now.